Welcome to the Life with a Difference podcast, a platform to amplify the voices of those living with a visible difference, and also to provide relevant information from industry leaders and experts. To start, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
So I'm Professor Sara Brown. My full title is Grant Chair of Dermatology and Wellcome Trust Senior Research Fellow. And what it means is I do both research and work as a consultant dermatologist. So I'm also an honorary consultant dermatologist for NHS Lothian here in Edinburgh.
I've wanted a dermatologist on the podcast since I started it, and I was so chuffed to not just get any old dermatologist. You know, if I was starting to list your credentials, I think we'd be here all day. So just say thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate. You know, just to kind of summarise, Sarah is the top of the game, and so I really appreciate your time. Thank you. I've always wanted to ask, and apologies if this is a silly question. What does it mean to be a professor, and what is the difference between a professor and a consultant, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's different types of professors. That's the first thing to say. So in the UK, the way you get to be a clinical professor is to work up through the ranks, being a junior doctor, specialising in a topic, and then becoming a consultant. But then it's doing things additional to being an NHS consultant. So most professors have a university workload as well as the NHS workload. And what makes you a professor is doing research in addition to the clinical work that you do.
Okay, thank you. Got it. Appreciate that. I always felt because I go to Guy's hospital in London, and whenever I see Professor walk in, for some reason that just straight away makes me feel more reassured.
Yeah, that's good. When I first became a professor, my kids were really into Harry Potter, and obviously there's a lot of professors in Harry Potter. So I like to model myself on Professor McGonagall, who's the ultimate professor. But yeah, in reality, being a professor basically means more work, as well as I mean, to be fair, the reason I love having professor in front of my name is because it does give that special bond, I think, with a patient. It shows like I care about your condition as a doctor, but I care so much that I go the extra mile in terms of doing research to try and understand your condition as well. So
Mhm.
clearly don't know everything, but have a real understanding that more research is needed to the extent that I'm actually doing that. Like I'm trying my best to do that. So it is, maybe it's a bit cheesy to say this, but it is a great privilege.
Yeah, it's certainly, it holds some respect as patients, as kind of a layman. As I say, straight away, you know that you're in very good hands. I'd like to think. What made you decide on derma, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, that's a long story as well. But when I was a medical student, I loved all the different specialties. So I loved respiratory, learning about lungs. I loved gastro, learning about the bowel. I loved cardiology. I just thought they were all really interesting. But I just kept coming back to dermatology because the reason I'm really interested in skin is because it's like a window on your body. So if you understand what you see on the surface of the skin, if you can analyze that by examining it as a clinician, then it gives you loads of information about what's going on inside. So it tells you about your heart and your lungs and your bowel and your brain and your emotions and your immune system. And it's like, yeah, it's just super smart. Your skin gives away loads of things. And unless you really specialize as a dermatologist, you never get to understand those things. So obviously, most doctors will look at the skin, but the majority of doctors kind of overlook it. They're sort of focusing on whatever they're specialised in, or just focusing on kind of trying to solve the most pressing, life-threatening problem. When in fact, if you take time to analyse the skin, you can find out a lot more about what really matters to the patient, as well as what might be going on inside. And I just loved all of that. I loved that detective work. So yeah, that's why I came back to dermatology.
We're very grateful to have you. I feel like for a long time there was kind of a little bit of an attitude of sort of this term derma holiday would be used quite a lot, and dermatology potentially wasn't as respected as I 100% think it should be, and it kind of plays into this sort of dismissive attitude that unfortunately quite a lot of us have experienced. Would you say was that your experience when you were training, and would you say that's maybe changing a little bit now?
It was definitely my experience. I mean, I kind of joked about going around all the specialties and enjoying them all, but I heard that term derma holiday repeatedly, mostly when I was a medical student, I guess less after I graduated. Because once you start work as a doctor, you do kind of realize that you're missing a trick when you don't understand the skin. Um, but no, it's still prevalent and it's still, every grant application that I write to ask for money to fund my research, the first paragraph always says skin is a very important organ because dot dot dot, and eczema is a very important disease because dot dot dot. So I have to justify to, other professors, other researchers, other grant giving bodies why skin and my research and the condition eczema is worthy of support. So no, it still exists, and I think to be fair, it's partly because when your skin's working really well, it's something you can absolutely take for granted. So people that have never had trouble with the skin, you might want your skin to look beautiful, but aside from that, you just don't need to bother about it. It does its job, it keeps you alive. There's loads of stuff that you don't even realize and you just ignore it. Whereas, people are more aware that if your heart goes wrong or your brain goes wrong or your joints go wrong, people immediately know that matters. People don't overlook those things. People do overlook skin because usually it's working fine and you can just ignore it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's so bizarre that a condition that's so tangible and there for everyone to see, it can be so dismissed. And I understand there's a spectrum, and I can understand a lack of urgency or a lack of real concern on one end of the spectrum where you get a little bit of a rash for sure. But to dismiss that entire spectrum, where on the other side, it's something that can frankly completely ruin your life and particularly your mental health, I would say, and it could even, in the worst cases, be a contributor to suicide. I would say to dismiss that seems bizarre, and that's frustrating to hear that even at your level, you're still having to face that.
On the positive, I do write that paragraph at the beginning of every grant, and I do get major grants. So I told you part of my title is Welcome Trust Senior Research Fellow. So that's a grant that I got given. I was awarded by the Wellcome Trust to do genetic research in eczema specifically. So they do get it. They do get it. That when you explain it clearly, just as you did, eczema does really matter and it affects the whole of the person's life. Then they do get it, and they gave me more than £2 million to do the research that I'm doing. So it's definitely not hopeless, but it's just something that it's still something that you have to explain every time.
Okay, okay. Sounds like, yeah, when in the important times, um, we get what we need. That's good. Kind of very general question. What makes skin conditions so difficult to treat?
Makes them difficult to treat. I think it's partly that they're so complex. So you mean skin conditions in general, not just eczema, the multiple different skin
I
conditions?
guess eczema, I suppose, is where I'm coming from. Yeah, why does eczema seem to be? You see all these other people with other conditions, and they go in and they get their injection, or they take their pill, and they're off again. And I'm unfortunately someone who has. I've been through all of them. Let me know if I'm not supposed to say this, but I've been through dupilumab, lebrikizumab, tralokinumab, abrocitinib, upadacitinib, and unfortunately they work for a while, and then they go off a cliff. And these are very, um, exciting new medications with a lot of good success rates. I'm now currently in a mix of methotrexate and lebrikizumab. So yeah, what makes it so difficult?
Yeah, so I mean, in a way, this is what I spend my life studying to try because it is very difficult. And what makes it difficult is the complexity of the disease. So there are many diseases, some skin diseases, but any other human disease. Some of them are caused by kind of one major factor. So a genetic change, for example, and you get a severe disease. But the majority of human diseases are not caused by one major factor. They're caused by lots of different things that come together. And eczema is one of those things. It's not just one thing, it's many different genetic effects coming together, but then it's combined with many different environmental effects. So even people with very similar genetics, so twins, for example, they're born with essentially the same genetics. But in a set of twins, one might get eczema and one might not get eczema. So the one person that does get eczema is because they've had different environmental factors that have affected their genetics. So it's like two really complex webs interacting, and if they happen to mesh in the wrong way or the right way, then you get eczema or you don't get eczema. So that's part of the complexity that causes it initially. But then the other complexity is even once you've got eczema, you kind of enter in then a lifelong trajectory that might go up, down, terrible, good, anything in between. And that is also very unpredictable. So, big research studies have tried to predict why is Andy's eczema terrible today where it was good yesterday? And why was it terrible yesterday when it was okay the day before? And we still don't understand that. So that's partly to do with stress levels, things from inside your body, things outside your body, again, environmental factors, plus microbiome. You'll have heard about the microbes that live on your skin that both keep your skin healthy and cause problems. They can do either. And then increasingly, we're learning about links between the skin and the internal organs. So I said that earlier on, but your skin communicates with your brain and vice versa. How you feel impacts how your skin is. We don't understand that very well. Your gut health impacts how your skin is. We don't understand that very well. The circulation impacts how your skin is. It is so complex. So when you get that enormous complexity and you're trying to cure it or sort it out, it's hard to know where to start. You've got this massive complexity. Which bit do I try and zap with my magic wand? Uh,
Mm,
it is difficult. And I think what
mm,
you've described, you've been through a lot of our really fantastic treatments that, from what we know, should work brilliantly, but they don't work for everybody. Um, and that comes back to the final bit of complexity. So this meshwork that I've talked about, the genes and the environment, they also all need to be in balance. So it's not just a static thing. Here you are, either you've got a disease or you haven't got a disease. If you've got the disease, we can try and correct it with the drugs, but that doesn't necessarily make it okay. It could just make it a bit unstable. And then you start to zigzag between different types of inflammation. And then it can get even more challenging.
mhm.
Yeah, there's lots of challenges.
That's a weird thing in that you have this idea again, going back to derm holiday, when you have an organ that is so complex and so difficult to treat, that requires some people, some very big brains to try and figure out. When you were talking about the consistency thing, I would say that is one of the hardest things to deal with having severe eczema. It's just, first of all, it's the unfairness of it. I'd like to believe I'm somebody that will do everything that I'm supposed to do. And so to then wake up and be in a massive flare for no apparent reason is so frustrating, and it makes it really difficult to settle into a new normal because you don't have one because it goes up and down so much all the time. So that is definitely something that is very, very, very difficult to handle. I was doing a little bit of research on you. I hope you don't mind, and I saw that one of the research kind of topics you're targeting is the FLG gene. Would you mind trying to explain that to a layman like me?
So, sure. For FLG stands for filaggrin. So the
Mhm,
gene is FLG, and the gene is like the code that makes this protein filaggrin. And filaggrin is a building block that strengthens the skin. And filaggrin is in the outermost layers of the skin. And we know that if you have enough filaggrin in your skin, it can make the skin a good barrier. So, like to protect your body from what's outside and to keep inside what should be inside. That's the barrier that we talk about. So filaggrin is very important in strengthening that barrier, making it a super smart barrier that, keeps microbes out, but allows a certain amount of ultraviolet light to come in, lets water go out, but lets a bit of water come in. It's in both directions. It's a super smart barrier. So the reason we found out that filaggrin was important in the skin is many, many years ago, people saw it when you take a sample of skin and look at it down the microscope, you can see the filaggrin there, the filaggrin protein in dots within the skin. But it was discovered that if you have mutations or spelling change or a mistake in the filaggrin gene, then you don't get the filaggrin protein. You don't have those dots that you see in the skin samples, and the skin is not so strong. And by not strong, I mean your skin is kind of dry and flaky and scaly and much, much more likely to develop eczema.
mhm,
So it was really that genetic link that made us go from seeing something down the microscope that we didn't know really what it was, to understanding that it's a cause for barrier weakness. A change in the filaggrin gene makes the barrier weaker, which makes you much, much more likely to get eczema. But and then it kind of went full circle. So we don't. So I've talked about having a change in your gene to give you not enough filaggrin, but we know now that if you have eczema, the eczema itself reduces the amount of filaggrin, so it kind of doesn't allow your skin to make enough filaggrin. So your DNA might be perfect, your filaggrin gene might be perfect,
Hmm.
but when you get all that eczema inflammation, it starts to switch off the filaggrin. So you kind of get into this vicious cycle of a leaky skin, less filaggrin, more leaky skin, more eczema.
Hmm.
It's something that is really intrinsic to what's going wrong.
We seem to have a lot of nasty cycles in eczema, don't we? With the scratch itch and all the.
Yeah, it's not it's really not
No.
fair.
But I hope this doesn't embarrass you. But just genuinely, it's so reassuring to hear, that how everything you're working on, and that people are trying to figure it out and trying to help. It's so amazing to hear everything that's being done.
It's
But
both ways, Andy. You mentioned it takes a big brain. It doesn't. It takes a brain. This well, anyway, it's teamwork, is what I'm going to say. It is teamwork. So I absolutely don't work alone. I've got lots of scientists that work with me. But the other really important part of the team is patients like yourself, patient advocates who get out there and speak about it, because it's hard. It's hard, especially when you've got a visible condition or something that people can be very dismissive of. And if
Mhm.
we don't work together as researchers, if we don't work together with patients, then we're barking up the wrong tree, basically. We need you guys to tell us what really matters. We need you guys to tell us how it is so that we know what to focus on. And then we also need you guys to share. I don't know if you've ever been asked for a skin biopsy, but sometimes patients are asked for a skin sample. Other times patients are asked for either a blood sample or a saliva sample to study the DNA. And there's a whole raft of people who don't have eczema but share information about themselves so that we can compare with people that have normal skin or normal blood or normal DNA. So it's absolutely teamwork, and scientists work in big teams with doctors. But we need patients, and we need the public as well to keep us on the right track and really power the research.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think one of the benefits for us is that we're a little bit more open to being. You're a little bit limited by regulation sometimes and things you can and can't say. So there's a little bit of freedom there for us to
I like
shout things from the roof a little bit more, I suppose.
it.
But yeah, I did have one of those biopsies, and like a biopsy trial thing, and my back looked like someone had gone at me with a machine gun for a while. I was full of holes. But yeah, I think more and more people are getting involved and are trying to just help in any way they can, especially since we've had kind of this new batch of medications come through that seems to be helping people. Are you able to talk a little bit about those and some of the results you're seeing?
Yeah, so as a dermatologist, like, it's super exciting to see the new drugs coming through. It is super exciting. And we've changed from, especially in the adult eczema clinic, we've changed from a clinic where, people would have had eczema their entire life and still got it in adulthood. And we're reaching a stage that patients had really tried every drug, every tablet, every treatment that we had. So we were really just kind of, seeing them for reassurance, but not really doing much actively when they come to clinic, to now having the whole portfolio of drugs that you've described, Andy. So, when a patient comes to clinic, if their skin is not controlled by the drugs that we've known historically might work, then we get a chance to move on to the biologics or the JAK inhibitors. And the advantage of those is they're designed based on what we know about the pathways or the specific mechanisms in eczema inflammation. So rather than using moisturizers and steroids, which work by kind of non-specifically just dampening down all inflammation, the biologics and the JAK inhibitors are much more specific. It's like targeted on a specific part of the immune system.
Mhm.
So in theory, they should have fewer side effects. And in practice, they should be more powerful because they're working on what we know is important rather than just the whole effect. In reality, as you've discovered, unfortunately, they still don't work for everybody. So I guess that's the challenge now. We've switched from having really frustration adult patients that we've reached the end of the road with. So
Mhm.
now we've got all these new roads opening up, but instead we're getting, another cohort of patients who've tried all the new treatments and we're still struggling to get their eczema under control. So it's just more reason that more work is needed. And I think it is that complexity. Um, but I think it's also, from my perspective, a lot of my research, I mean, you asked about filaggrin, my favourite gene. I have another favourite gene as well that also works similar to filaggrin, making the skin barrier very strong. And I think really the skin barrier is something that we haven't targeted yet very effectively with treatment. So the new treatments that you mentioned work on the immune system. And when you straighten out, correct the problem with the immune system, the skin barrier recovers, it gets a bit better, but that's not the same as having a specific treatment that can repair the skin barrier. At the moment, the treatments we have for that are basically moisturizers. You've probably spent your entire life using moisturizer, mixed blessing, shall we say. Um, so what I would love is to have a really specific directed treatment to improve skin barrier. People, patients don't just get treatment for the immune system, they also get treatment to improve the skin barrier. And you'd probably need the two together, one to switch off the redness and the other to boost the strength of the skin. So overall your skin gets a chance to recover and really go back to being the strong and effective organ that it should be.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, the frustrating thing for me was that I had windows where I thought I'd found my cure. Hallelujah! I'm fine. I've done it finally. The first one I took was dupilumab, and it was literally like I didn't have a skin condition anymore. For about 6 months, it was absolutely miraculous, and it was as amazing as I thought it would be in terms of one of the things that I really noticed was that I got my full cognition back. I wouldn't be sitting here thinking about how itchy I am, thinking about how sore I am, thinking about my routine and the logistical burden of all that. I got my full bandwidth, and that was absolutely lovely. But unfortunately, yeah, it very quickly went off a cliff. Are you able to talk at all about the pipeline and things that are coming out and things that are potentially exciting?
Yeah, so I mean, what can I say? There's a lot in development, is what I would say. So, this meshwork of different immune factors and genetic factors that I've spoken about, in theory, we can target pretty much any of those. So the pharmaceutical companies, it's kind of a race to target as many as possible, and then to test them and find which ones work well and which ones don't. So, you mentioned a couple of the drugs that you've been on, but already, dupilumab targets interleukin-4 and interleukin-13. So then the next generation was to target interleukin-13 itself. And then there's interleukin-31, which is an itchy cytokine that we can target. And really, it becomes like a bingo or a word salad. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
this this that there's an almost unlimited number of inflammatory markers within eczema that we could target. So the challenge is in identifying which are the most important, which is the one that's going to work for the patients where the other ones don't work.
Mm,
And then, so that's one approach. And then the other approach is, as I say, trying to improve skin structure in general. So not just the redness and the inflammation, but also the strength of the skin barrier. And there are drugs in the pipeline there that normalize what we call skin differentiation. So encourage the skin cells to make a really strong brick wall and to try and boost that. So there are small molecules targeting those. So antibodies are proteins that bind to part of the immune system, whereas a small molecule is a drug that it is a small molecule. It's like a little widget that goes in, that can either interact with the genes or the proteins to tell cells to behave differently. Um, and in this context, it's trying to tell the skin cells to make a stronger barrier. So that's something else to look out for. And then I guess other things in the pipeline, again, you mentioned you're on two things together. So, in many, many other conditions in medicine, we don't just use one drug, we use two or three or four together. But so far with eczema, with the new biologics, we've mostly been using one at a time, just because they are so new and because they seem to work so well. But I'm sure in the future we'll be combining them, uh,
mm,
so potentially methotrexate with the biologic. Uh, um, or maybe an induction treatment to sort of switch off the eczema and then something else to keep it stable. these are all strategies that we will be finessing over the years ahead.
I guess it is an exciting time, which is kind of a weird thing to say. An exciting time to have a skin condition, I suppose. It's certainly better than 100 years ago, that's for sure. And yeah, it's so positive to hear all of this. How would you choose, or maybe how would patients choose? I guess if they come to you and they're really suffering, and you have this nice basket of new medications, how do you choose which one to go on to first?
Yeah. So the first thing to say is it depends a little bit which part of the country you're in England or Scotland. But we both have quite strict rules, I would say rules, about what we're allowed to prescribe. So if a patient comes straight in off the street, they don't go immediately to the strongest biologics. So straight in off the street, we would always, well, any patient, whether or not they've been to the clinic 100 times, we always have a discussion about where they're at in terms of treatment. What treatment have you had so far? What has helped? What has not helped? Where have you got to? And it is kind of a stepwise process. And I know for patients that can be quite challenging, because when you come in with terrible disease and you're really struggling with your skin, the last thing you want is to feel that you've got to kind of jump through these hoops or go through the preliminary steps. But the reason we have that is partly because NHS budgets and restrictions are in place to manage the NHS budgets. But also, to be honest, if it was me, if it was my sister, or if it was my child, there is a very important principle that you start treating with the drugs and the medication that we've known and we're comfortable with and we've used for many years. The reason for that is we know they've got side effects, but we know what those side effects are. So if you start with something that we really understand, we know the side effects, we know what the side effects are, we can monitor for them, we can keep you safe. It's very important to go through those steps of what is really well known. And it's not just because it's cheaper. It is sometimes when you add it up, actually the cost is quite similar. But it's about knowledge and safety and kind of, comfortableness really in making sure you can keep this patient safe, aiming to get their skin good and keep them safe. Uh, many patients respond brilliantly to those what we call conventional systemics. So things like cyclosporin, methotrexate that we've used for many years. Many patients they work brilliantly. And if they work brilliantly, frankly, if it was me, um, I'd be, once a tablet works well, it is really good to stay on that. You don't necessarily, it's not true to say that the newer ones are always the best. So that's the first thing. That's why we go through all these steps. If you can get good disease control with the conventional systemics, it's a win-win. And then if they don't work, then that opens up the licensing and the ability for your doctor to prescribe whatever is the next step in the new biologics and the small molecule JAK inhibitors. And then it depends on your local agreement which one you go for.
Yeah, yeah, it's difficult. It's a kind of a crossroads there between patients and clinicians, understandably, is that patients come in with all the emotion of the situation, so you feel like you're dragging yourself in with a gunshot wound or something, whereas the clinician wants to, is trying to look after safety and looking at things more objectively. So as the patient, you want the kitchen sink thrown at you, but understandably, the clinicians want to carefully introduce things and make sure everything's safe. So would you say, because I may have this wrong, the new medications seem to be a little bit, I don't know if safe is too broad of a word, a little bit safer and then potentially more effective than, for example, methotrexate and cyclosporin. But so we use methotrexate and cyclosporin first just because they've been studied for longer. Is that right?
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying. In some ways, the new ones appear to be safer. So dupilumab, for example, in theory, you can start on that and stay on it without any blood tests at
Hmm.
all. I say in theory, in practice, you can, and you do. So on the face of it, it looks very safe. And but there's always a but. There's always a worry that in the longer term, we still don't quite know what dupilumab is going to do to somebody 30, 40, 50 years down the lines. I think, if you go back to the original trials of dupilumab, people have been on it now 10, 20 years, maybe even longer from the earliest trials, and it still looks okay. But, if you take somebody with eczema, then you're really hoping that person is going to be living in their skin for another, 50, 60, 70 years, even longer if it's a child. And we simply do not know what the biologics do over that number of decades. Whereas if you ask me, do I know what methotrexate does over 70 years? I can say yes, because we've been using methotrexate for that many years. We know what it does. We know that you get, an additive effect of side effects in some people and not in others. And the other thing about methotrexate and cyclosporin is we know what the side effects are, so we can test for them. Whereas the newer biologics, we don't know what the side effects are. We hope there's none, but we can't actually test for them because, these ones that are so targeted, like dupilumab, we haven't recorded a lot of side effects. Probably the biggest side effect is the eye inflammation and the face inflammation that some people get, uh, and that's a side effect that we're monitoring carefully. Patients that go on these drugs in the UK, we invite you to go into a registry so we can record the ultra long term outputs. And obviously, the pharmaceutical companies are also doing that. The MHRA is doing that through yellow cards. So there's a lot of effort to gain all that knowledge. So over the next 10, 20 years, we will shift accordingly. So the more reassurance we get that decades of these treatments are safe, the more we'll be able to shift. And I'm focusing on biologics, but also, the JAK inhibitors are something that we've already sort of shifted our concern about risk. So, when JAK inhibitors were first introduced for eczema, there was a lot of concern about cardiovascular side effects and etc. And I think it's fair to say with the patients that we've treated, we've been sort of reassured that our patients with the next generation of JAK inhibitors, it doesn't seem to be very high risk, but still we don't know. It's that I suppose it. Yeah, I'm a bit hesitant because it sounds a little bit like doctors are deciding what patients will get. The way it is in reality is discuss it in clinic, and I hope you would have had that experience. I know doctors do it in different ways, but I would always discuss with a patient, like when they sit in front of me off the street, what is it that you're hoping for? And then we kind of start from that area. And in a patient that says, I want the kitchen sink thrown at me, then we can discuss that because it is all about different levels of need and levels of risk. And that is not something that a doctor decides black and white in isolation. Those kind of understandings and perceptions and levels of suffering compared to levels of risk is very much something that we need to decide together with the clinician and the patient together, to make the best decision. Because, it's teamwork. It's teamwork in treatment as well as in research.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely got the eye issues after dupilumab, and my skin cleared up, and then my eyes went quite bad, and I thought, oh great, here we go, that's it then, can't take this. And I went and got the Icavis, and fortunately that sorted me out straight away. I've got a bit of a winky eye today, but that's due to nuclear grade pollen outside, I think. But
Oh, wow. Not a good time if you've got eye allergy.
yeah, it's been bad. It's been, even with all the fexofenadines, it doesn't seem to be touching it. But not to turn this into like a free private consultation, but I forgot to ask my dermatologist last time. He said something about something being off-label. I think it was in relation to taking methotrexate and lebrikizumab together. Do you mind explaining that to people?
So off-label means basically a doctor is giving something that hasn't been licensed for that treatment specifically. So the term off-label means it doesn't say, like in an old-fashioned way, it doesn't say on the label of the drug, this drug is to be used for this treatment. So yeah, it is exactly that. It's prescribing a drug that hasn't been rigorously tested and isn't specifically designed for that indication. So you think, well, that sounds a bit crazy, but we do it quite a lot in many different medical specialties. If there isn't to reach the level of being licensed requires many many years of clinical trials. So uh, you know, that can be done in some diseases and it's harder to do in other diseases. And I think in inflammatory skin disease, when you're faced with a patient who has ongoing skin inflammation, the rationale for going off label or using something that hasn't been fully tested is kind of using logic, right? So this patient is still really troubled with their skin condition. We've tried this, we've tried this, we've tried this, they don't work. So why don't we try these two together? And it's off label because nobody's done a clinical trial to
Uh,
prove that putting those two together works better than is each one by itself. But from logic, from medical knowledge, from theoretical reasoning, we can hope that if we put these two treatments together, they might work better than each one alone. Off-label treatment would always be discussed with the patient, just as your clinician did. You don't just hand these things out and say, "Where you go, there's a prescription." You say, we don't have an obvious option. One potential is to use an off-label treatment, i.e. something that hasn't been properly tested or fully tested.
Hmm. It's nice to know as a patient that is an option. I'm very much a kitchen sink person, and so it's nice. It's good to know that there is kind of that bit of flexibility there, and yeah, ability to be in the position that I am. Otherwise, I would essentially kind of be at the end of the road, which I find absolutely terrifying. And so it's nice that we have that option. Something just to change the subject very slightly. I'm conscious of taking too much of your time, but there's a kind of I see after stepping into the advocacy world. There is um, a surge or a wave, I suppose, of they call them skinfluencers, right? And so they're people on Instagram who often have lived experience and are sharing their experience, etc. I am very much a person who is on the side of science, and I trust science, and I want everyone. I don't want people having fruit juices to heal their cancer. I want people to go and get chemo. And I see a little bit of too many people pushing towards this healthy alternative. And, it's all very Instagrammable and lovely, and it's meditation and it's retreats and stuff like that. But I find that quite concerning. Is that something that concerns you as a clinician? And kind of how do you deal with that, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, does it concern me? Yeah, it does concern me. I guess, firstly, to look at it positively. I mean, the concept that a human being is a holistic thing. We're not just skin. We're not just a bag that covers everything else. Skin is part of you as a whole person. I think that concept of caring for the whole person, both by themselves and as a doctor, is really important. So in that regard, I can see the positive that people are considering themselves in a holistic way and supporting themselves and trying to help themselves. That's a positive. The negative I see is a bit as you alluded, if people then go to the extreme that they don't use the help that is available, by which the example you gave, if you have cancer, then you know chemotherapy is important. Not to say it's nice, but it's important. And it's the same. The challenge with skin, I guess, is it's not, people don't always see it as black and white like that. So this risk benefit analysis, this that I was talking to you about with the off license treatment, in cancer, it's clear to most people if you've got cancer, you need treatment. But for many people, if you have a skin condition, then skinfluencers or society in general can put quite a lot of pressure on people to either go for your skin's got to be perfect, or you shouldn't be taking that drug because it's only skin. And then people, it goes from the other extreme, from holistic care and well-being to like total confusion, stress, loads of pressure. And that's what I see in clinics sometimes, people who they just get so much unsolicited advice about the skin. I mean, people take their baby to the supermarket, they're just going shopping, baby's in the trolley, and somebody in the supermarket takes upon themselves to give that total stranger advice about how to treat their baby's eczema. And parents have described this to me, and obviously it's super stressful, and you're just like, it's my baby and I'm doing my best. Please don't.
Mm,
Nobody would stop you in the supermarket aisle and tell you what to do about your kidneys. Well, they might, but you just walk away. But with
mhm.
skin, somehow everybody feels free to comment. And I think that extra confusion and pressure and kind of freedom to give unsolicited advice is something that just makes people with skin conditions struggle even more than they already do. And that really upsets me. And then I suppose the ultimate is when people then turn away from care that we can offer. So, some people don't want to come and see a dermatologist because of the messages on social media. If you see a dermatologist in the NHS, they're going to poison you with topical steroids or insist on immunosuppressive treatment or then it harms that relationship where we could potentially help that person. They then
Mhm,
won't come into our clinic, and that is very upsetting,
mhm.
and it's something that I worry about.
Yeah, my mum used to talk about, and my mum was and is an absolute angel, how she would feel, um judged and shamed. Even though she was absolutely brilliant with me, people would kind of insinuate that I wasn't being looked after properly, which is just awful. And you'd have and you almost have, I see it a lot on social media. You have people, um, they almost do confession videos that they're on methotrexate or dupilumab. It's like, I can't, there's, I've tried everything, and it's a really, really sad day. And obviously, in an ideal world, we all want to live without medication, of course. But say in the same way, someone with diabetes needs insulin, or someone with cancer needs chemo. There's no shame in needing medication for your condition. That really frustrates me. Something that I keep seeing over and over again is this stuff about TSW. I haven't experienced TSW personally. What's your opinion of TSW?
Yeah, I mean, that's a massive question. So first to say TSW exists. I mean, I guess it's been a major hurdle between dermatologists and patients that, um, a feeling that, well, and I think it's fair to say in the early days, some dermatologists didn't believe that TSW existed. And I think there probably are still dermatologists that don't believe it exists. I believe it exists. The British Association of Dermatologists believe it exists. So TSW is a thing and it's a challenge, and we need to understand it and mostly prevent it, but then urgently help the people that have got it and are going through it. In terms of what it is, I've actually recently been awarded, along with a researcher called Alice Burley. We've been given a grant from the National Eczema Society to start doing research into TSW, because there is so much misunderstanding and lack of understanding. We're really starting from a very low base. What is TSW? Asking patients to tell us what they think it is, recording data to try and put together what is kind of consistent amongst all those different people. Because part of the challenges with TSW is there are certain things that everybody reports, but then there are a lot of things that are different in different people. So kind of what is TSW as a nugget entity? That's sort of the first step of what we need to try and understand it scientifically. We need to be clear first, what is this thing that we're dealing with? And then we start dissecting it with molecular analysis. So that's what we're going to do. In the meantime, it's just to say, uh, you know, and I can't speak for the whole of dermatologists, and I do know some people have bad experiences with dermatologists and with doctors and pharmacists and lots of healthcare professionals. But I can honestly say there is a heightened awareness um, of the need to use topical steroids cautiously and carefully in people with eczema, but they remain potentially a life-changing treatment. They remain something that can quite rapidly turn off skin inflammation and turn around somebody's life. And the important, that what's really important for the future is to make sure that people that benefit from topical steroids are able to have them, and people that will be harmed from topical steroids don't get that harm. And that's what we're working urgently toward.
I think that some people use that as the pathway to the don't go to your dermatologist because they'll poison you. But I totally agree with you that it definitely seems to be a thing, and people are suffering so much with it. And yeah, it's good to hear that, because I mentioned it before, and the attitude I received was very dismissive. And so it's nice to hear that it's kind of being considered and studied, and people are potentially going to get some relief from it. Um, Sorry, very very quick question. So I've had situations where, for example, I've been in a really, really serious flare, and my mental health is kind of at an all-time low, and I feel like I'm clinging on and making it day to day, and it's just horrendous. And there's situations where I've gone in to see my dermatologist, and quite frankly, what I want, and what I think I need, is a course of prednisolone as a reset. Understandably, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, understandably, clinicians are hesitant with prednisolone because of the potential effects down the line. Is there do I, as a patient, have the right to politely demand it, or is that always going to be the clinician's decision, if that makes sense?
Gosh, that's a big question. You absolutely have the right to say anything politely to your doctor. And I suppose in that situation, I would encourage you to politely say what is on your heart and what is in your mind and say it, okay? Because what's worst is when, for whatever reason, people don't say what they really think, providing you're saying it politely. So, a doctor needs to show respect to the patient, and that respect is what I'm saying now. We want to hear what you're thinking, what you're really thinking, even if you think we don't want to hear it. The respect that we have is that we do want to hear it. But likewise, the respect that you need for a good doctor-patient relationship is for the patient to say it politely. And I guess the major, major challenge there is at the end of the day, your doctor is trying to do what's best for you as a whole person and you in the future. And that is a fear that we have for systemic steroids. We know that they cause awful problems down the line. The reason, I mean, I'm probably one of the hardest people to get a course of prednisolone out of. The reason for that is because I know that, well, number one, if you take prednisolone and then stop taking it, you can get really sick, and your skin can end up much worse in the longer term. So you can go into this kind of zigzaggy. Okay, the prednisolone helps, and then you have to come off it, and your skin's much worse. I, you know, I want to try and avoid that at every cost because it's not good for the patient or for me as a clinician. But then the other thing is, the advantage of skin is because it's out there, we always have the option to use steroids on the skin surface. So prednisolone works well because it's one tablet and it goes through your whole circulation to everywhere. But that's also why it causes all the problems because it goes through your circulation to all your other body organs. So with eczema, it's there on the surface. We can give the steroid, give very potent steroid if we help that patient enough to do that treatment. So if somebody comes into my clinic begging for oral steroids, I take that very seriously and address tell me what it is that you're hoping that the steroids will do for you. And if at the end of the day I can't offer anything better, then I have to agree to give oral steroids. But then the important thing is an off ramp. So yeah, I give you prednisolone, but we have a plan that you're not going to stay on prednisolone and you're not going to keep getting that.
Hmm. Okay, that's
Yeah,
fair.
it's
Thank you.
it's a difficult discussion and very
It
important.
is. It is, yeah. And we as patients need to, as much as we can, try and stay calm in those situations because it feels like you're really suffering potentially, and someone's blocking you, and that's kind of the chimp side of your brain is saying that in that situation where your emotions are so heightened, so you have to try and remain balanced. Very last question, and if you need to go, please just tell me. But in terms of one issue we have in Derma at the moment is that people go to their GP, and can often be a very, very long referral time, often up to a year plus. And I've been in situations where I simply cannot wait a year because I've frankly felt suicidal. Is there anything you can say to a GP to stress the urgency and the fact this is an emergency and this is beyond just a rash, I suppose?
Yeah, yeah. Again, I mean, Uh, yeah, it's a difficult question, and I know you understand that GPs work super hard and they're trying hard to do what's right. And I think really the failure or the weakness is in the whole system. So it's not necessarily the GP blocking the referral. Often they've made a referral. The problem then comes because the hospital consultants can't see the patients quickly enough. So that sometimes the GP might even refer urgently, but still you're waiting far, far, far too long to be seen. So it's a systemic problem. But that doesn't help when you're the one that desperately needs the help. So again, what I would say is it's about being honest and not being frightened to say and show how it really feels. Because the vast, vast majority of doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals are in the system because they do want to help. They don't want to block, they don't want to deny, they don't want to downplay something that is affecting your mental health and your physical health in such a severe way. So it's about getting that message across. Because at the end of the day, you know, there are always chinks that you could get in quicker. If everybody goes for that, the system's gonna fall apart. But when you're as you describe, Andy, sometimes people do reach the end of their tether and it's an absolute emergency. And we need to know, doctors need to know, so it's about using all communication skills that you have. Be eloquent if you're eloquent. Some people are, some people aren't. And there's this thing called health literacy, which describes that ability to communicate, to get your message across. And health literacy involves speaking like we're doing now. You're very, very eloquent. I can't, you keep calm and you're able to say things. Not everybody can do that. And I understand there'll be times in your life when you can't do that. So that's when you have to use other help. So whether it's you take a friend with you, take a family member, take somebody that'll advocate for you, that happens regularly in my clinic. The patient, for whatever reason, just isn't able to say what they need to say. So the pal or their mum or their partner or their friend sitting next to them says it. That's brilliant, brilliant. And the other thing to do is just keep saying it. So if you feel you fobbed off, it is absolutely okay to go and see that same doctor again or to see a different doctor and just say the same thing again because, doctors are humans. They make mistakes. They can be stubborn. They can be overworked. They can just not have time or space to listen. And if that patient keeps coming back, then at the end of the day, you get a referral. This patient has been to see me multiple times and they are demanding a referral to dermatology. That's great. So it's about getting the message across in
Yeah.
whatever way you can.
And don't be scared to be the squeaky wheel, I suppose. But
Absolutely not. It's
yeah.
important.
Mm. Sarah, thank you so, so much for your time. It's amazing that someone of your level would give me an hour of your time. I hugely, hugely
Don't
appreciate
say that,
it.
Andy. It's an amazing thing that somebody at your level would bother to talk to me time. So it
And
works
it's
both ways.
thank you so much. And it's as I say, it's so reassuring to hear that people like you are out there working hard for us and trying to help us and provide us with some relief. So thank you so, so much for your time.
Well, pleasure to talk to you. Thanks.